super pleased to have with me on the line Lori Wallach, the Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. The website citizen.org/trade. And you can tweet her at Wallach Lori, WALLACHLORI. And Lori, there's another URL for your for Global Trade Watch, isn't there?
TradeWatch.org.
TradeWatch.org. Bless you. Thank you. We've got to reprogram Sean to make sure that that gets into the one sheet every day. So I found this headline fascinating. As Trump rattles U.S.-China policy, new report shows the TPP would have proved useless in countering China's ambitions. The TPP was being sold to us by the Obama administration, among others, as a way of basically cornering or blocking out China from the rest of commerce in Southeast Asia so that we would control that commercial region rather than China controlling it. A, I'm not even sure that's a good idea, but B, that's apparently not the case.
Well, what we did is we have seen this hysteria since it became obvious there wasn't a majority in Congress to implement the TPP about how the TPP's demise was a foreign policy crisis, which seemed kind of funky because originally it was sold as an economic panacea. So why is it now a foreign policy crisis?
Right.
So we started looking back and we saw that every time a trade agreement fails on the economics argument and the public sees through it, there is a set of four specific categories of foreign policy apocalyptic predictions that are made if an agreement isn't passed, and crazy promises of things that will happen if an agreement is passed. And so we just started to realize these zombie foreign policy arguments, always used to try and scare up an agreement that's on its way out, was now being recycled for TPP. And so, yes, the answer is we now can empirically prove, because we went back 2 decades from NAFTA, CAFTA, the China permanent normal trade relations fight. We looked at the exact same arguments, often made by the same people: Senator Kerry, Secretary Kerry, Senator Biden, Vice President Biden, over the course of 20 years. And in the past, these arguments always worked to pass the agreements. So we can go back and see what really happened. So, for instance, during China PNTR, the report's actually very fun to read. It's right in the front page of TradeWatch.org, www.tradewatch.org. It's full of tables where you have side-by-side quotes. So, right during the China WTO, China entering the World Trade Organization fight in 2000, you have a lot of the same voices saying the same thing now, but saying it's either we write the rules or China writes the rules, or either we do this and China helps us with a whole set of foreign policy challenges, or we don't do it and the American leadership is diminished in the world. And then you look at the same people saying the exact same thing, except you go back. Well, China PNTR, Congress passed that 15 years ago. Actually, China didn't follow any of the rules that were supposed to be our rules. That just didn't happen. Says who? The U.S. negotiator, the lead for negotiating that agreement.
Right.
Or China hasn't suddenly gotten incredibly cooperative with the U.S., and in fact, it's escalated its hostilities with its neighbors over territorial fights in the South China Sea. It has basically chosen avoiding North Korean immigrant flood over helping stop the North Korean nuclear program. Yeah. Basically, everything that was claimed, the opposite. And certainly, we didn't see the big panacea of human rights improvements in China. So the notion that these same agreements, and you can track back the same claims that didn't work out for NAFTA, CAFTA, et cetera, are just, it's silliness to raise it again. And that's the point of this very sadly funny report.
Right. Now, other than PNTR, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is that other than permanent normal trade relations with China, that which arguably isn't even a trade deal, it's just, well, you know it better than I do. You can tell me what it is. But it's not like TPP or NAFTA or CAFTA or the Korea Free Trade Deal or any of these things in some ways. That that was the only deal that was supported by the majority of Democrats in the House and Senate, as well as Republicans. Every other deal, every single one of these other trade deals was passed by a majority of Republicans in the House and the Senate, and opposed by a majority of Democrats in the House and Senate, even though they might have been signed or by Bill Clinton ultimately, even though it was negotiated under George Herbert Walker Bush, NAFTA, for example, and GATT, or that President Obama was in favor of TPP, even though the majority of his party wasn't. So there's kind of a partisan element to this. You're mentioning Democrats who are making these sales pitches. Aren't Republicans making them too?
Absolutely. And the charts, basic charts in the study show, for instance, Bush making the same exact arguments on CAFTA that we now have, in this particular instance, Secretary Kerry making on TPP, which has to do with stability in the region and human rights. So, President Bush, the second one, in selling CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement in 2005, basically laid out a whole claim about how doing that would guarantee that there would be more democracy, more peace, more stability in Central America. So, pardon me, he specifically said, our first trade priority is to pass the Central American Free Trade Agreement with CAFTA. Today, a part of the world that was once characterized by unrest and dictatorship now sees its future in free elections and free trade. We must not take these gains for granted. By transforming our hemisphere into a powerful free trade area, we will promote democratic governance, human rights, and the economic liberty for everybody. That's President George W. Bush in 2005. Very similar to what Secretary Kerry said about passing TPP, but the difference is we can now look back to what's happened. And so, within 4 years of the CAFTA being implemented, because people bought that sales job, there was a coup, a military coup in Honduras, and then the democratically elected president, Zelaya, was thrown out. First coup in Latin America in 25 years. So that CAFTA democracy thing worked really well. And then, since then, we've seen the other countries in the CAFTA, the Dominican Republic, for instance, having its ranking as far as the Freedom House rankings of political freedoms and room for independent media drop. We've seen Guatemala go to the worst ranking in the International Trade Union Confederation, the Labor Confederation ranking. It's down there with Colombia as one of the most violent countries for workers in many years. It's gotten a lot worse since CAFTA. We've seen Nicaragua having the worst violations in human rights, freedom of association, and free expression of basically its entire sort of history of being tracked by the human rights movement. And El Salvador and Honduras now have higher murder rates than before 2005. There goes that peaceful progress. And right now, El Salvador has the highest murder rate of any country that's not at war. So if you look at the precise promises, you can empirically prove the opposite happened. And it's systematic with 20-plus years of trade agreements, which may help to explain why the foreign policy distraction didn't work this time. I mean, Thom, what happens is the corporations cook up a trade agreement. They try to sell it with all kinds of baloney economic arguments. Increasingly, Americans see through it because they've lived with the real results. The agreement's starting to go down, and to try and pass this Trojan horse of corporate empowerment branded as a trade agreement, we start to hear the usual suspects scream about the imminent perils of our national security, American leadership in the toilet if we don't pass this trade agreement. Yeah. The thing is, it didn't work this time with TPP. There was an attempt to sell it that way. And I wonder if part of the reason why is the American people already knew what we took all this time to research and write down, which is it turns out those arguments are just 100% baloney.
To the best of my knowledge, every member of Trump's proposed cabinet who has ever gone on the record with regard to trade has gone on the record in favor of TPP. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I've seen it in 2 different places. Can we expect TPP to be resurrected, like, probably under some new name, because Trump, ran on a campaign of killing TPP under his administration?
Well, if folks would like to actually look at that rogues gallery of cabinet members who supported TPP and be able to attach the names to the people, I recommend you go to a website www.trumpeduptrade.org, www.trumpeduptrade.org. And it has, I've seen that whole list of cabinet folks in their TPP position. I think that the scenario that we need to wonder about is there's sort of two ways you can look at that. So either, despite it being his top issue and the issue on which he basically flipped Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan right into being the president, Trump was being a con man on the trade issues. Yeah. That's one scenario. And these TPP supporters are represent his real thinking. Right. I actually kind of doubt that. He's been consistently against these kind of agreements since NAFTA. He was speaking out against NAFTA. So
they're just echoing conventional wisdom, and and now, I mean, I'm also, you know, as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure you share, I'm no fan of Donald Trump. In fact, I think he may represent an existential threat to our republic. I think he's a Mussolini in waiting at the very least. But that said, you know, even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Right. And that's what I was going to get to option number two. Okay. I agree with you about Trump, which is either the whole thing was a sham, but on this issue, actually, I don't think it was. That's pretty consistently where he's been. So I think the second scenario is he has such a notion of his word being the word of God that picking a cabinet is not like picking staff in some hierarchical corporate structure. So he's picking all these people who totally disagree with him on the issue that got him elected, the trade issue. And I'm suspecting he believes he will just be able to announce, this is what we will be doing. Now implement my commands.
Well, in fact, we have a clue to this already. This is the headline at Salon is Buy American or Else, a Republican plan to kill import cost tax write-offs as retail industries alarmed. And the headline over at the Wall Street Journal, Trump's punitive power over companies appears hedged. And basically what they're saying is that the tax break that companies get when they move factories overseas is going to be done away with, you know, by the Trump administration. Now, Nancy Pelosi actually passed a bill through Congress, through the House of Representatives, in the first months or the first year of the Obama administration that did that. And it got to the Senate, and it got more than 50 votes, if my recollection is correct, although it failed because it failed to pass a Republican filibuster. And so it never made its way to the president. That would have done away with the incentives to move a factory overseas, tax incentives, and would have replaced them with tax incentives to move people back here. But it looks like Trump is now going to take that Nancy Pelosi legislation, call it his own, and push it through. What do you know about that?
There are now a variety of different tax proposals that everyone who's pushing a tax proposal is trying to frame it as helping stop offshoring.
Yeah, of course.
And I think it's going to bear scrutiny. So, for instance, the Republicans in the House, Ryan, have a tax proposal that they're claiming would stop the incentives to offshore. But the way the thing is actually structured is not clear it would do that. And it would be super regressive for consumers as far as how it's set up.
Oh, geez.
On the other hand, the thing Pelosi had in mind actually would have closed that loophole. And we have to see what Trump actually puts out in the smorgasbord of options to see if what he's proposing will do the job or not. But this gets back to his cabinet. If it really would do the job, is he going to have a war within his cabinet where these agency heads are going to have more discretion and more power than perhaps Trump is used to, the government context being different than the corporate context?
Yeah, we're just about to hit a hard break here, but I wonder to what extent this is going to play into the idea that Mike Pence is actually going to be the president and Trump is going to be the chairman of the board. So the person who's going to have to deal with the cabinet and who's going to have to deal with Congress is Pence. And Pence is pro-free, so-called free trade, TPP, et cetera. It's a mess.
Correct.
Lori Wallach, the director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. TradeWatch.org is the website. You can tweet her at Wallach Lori. Lori, thanks so much.
Thank you. To be continued.
Thank you indeed.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Lori Wallach is one of the very best. She is spectacular. We'll be back in just a moment. It's 21 minutes past the hour.